And thanks for having this hearing. And let me just say to our panel, thanks for being here and thanks for the work you're doing. But remind all of you that our farmers and ranchers would much rather get a check from selling their products than they would from the federal government. And I think my concern in all this is that we are losing global market share. And that's why I think it's really important that we close some of these trade deals out. And this hearing is designed to provide certainty to farmers and ranchers with a specific focus on trade. And when I travel in South Dakota, what farmers and ranchers ask me is, when are these trade issues going to be resolved? And so I'm asking you, can you give me and our farmers and ranchers a timeline regarding China? Mr. Dowd.
Senator, I understand those concerns, and believe me, they're talked about at USTR every single day. We circulate ag commodity prices in the building every single day of what's going on. I think in terms of the China discussion, I don't know is the answer. We'll have to see the meeting. I believe there will be a meeting that occurs between President Trump and President Xi here towards the end of the month. And I think that's our next line of demarcation here to see how this is going to go.
Can you give us any kind of timeline at all regarding Japan, bilateral deal?
Senator, I cannot. I can only tell you that the conversations with regard to agriculture and trade between the U.S. and Japan are ongoing as we speak.
Given the administration's interest in negotiating bilateral trade deals instead of multilateral agreements like TPP, in addition to the two we've just discussed, can you share with us the status of any other trade agreements the administration is pursuing?
Well, in addition to USMCA, we've also, through the TPA process here on Capitol Hill, indicated U.S. interest in negotiating with the European Union, the UK, and the UK. I don't know what the Brexit process is going to be, but obviously the UK is something that we are taking keen interest in. The other part of the world that is of enormous interest is Africa. And we all know that there are other countries in the world that are taking an interest in that as well, and I want to assure you, Senator, that USTR is interested in that part of the world as well.
Is there any, though, when you talk about discussions with the EU or the UK, is it anything more than that at this stage? I mean, are we talking about very embryonic type discussions, or are we actually in a process of negotiation with any of these potential trading partners?
Well, obviously with the UK, we've got to wait and see
Right.
what the Brexit timeline is.
About the EU?
Well, with the EU, I will tell you quite frankly that they've been very frank in their interest in saying no agriculture. And our point has been very simple. There's no way to come to Congress and do a deal that doesn't include agriculture. So how are we going to rectify this?
Well, we support that position, and but I think there's great potential, obviously, with China, great potential with Japan, and if the EU would drop some of their tariff and non-tariff barriers and really seriously enter into a negotiation on agriculture, that also would be a great market for American agriculture. But I would just urge you to just understand the sense of urgency, I think, out there in farm country. These are really tough times, and not only now do we have all the trade issues, but we've got weather piled on top of that, in addition to chronic year after year, year over year, low commodity prices, and producers who are increasingly operating below the cost of production. You can't. It's a situation we can't sustain and keep these farmers in business. And in that vein, I just very quickly want to touch on the MFP program. In the June 10 USDA press release, provided, I quote, "If you choose to plant a cover crop with potential to be harvested because of this year's adverse weather conditions, you may qualify for a minimal amount of 2019 MFP assistance. You must still comply with your crop insurance requirements to remain eligible for any indemnities received," and that's end quote. And I guess the question is, if you're eligible for a minimal amount of MFP assistance, why wouldn't USDA make a more equitable MFP payment to producers comparable to the MFP payment that would be paid if that producer had been able to plant and harvest a crop? Dr. Johansson.
As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to balance, trying not to incentivize market distortionary decisions, and we want farmers to plant for their operation, for their what works best for them given the current prices we're seeing out there, as well as the current agronomic conditions that they're seeing on their operation.
And I get that, but we're not
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about, we're telling people that haven't planted.
Right. And so, you know, as with last year, you know, we're viewing the current situation with respect to prevent plant as something that, by and large, should be covered by the prevent plant conditions that are part of their normal crop insurance contract, and that. While if producers do plant an eligible cover crop, they will receive a component of their of the MFP payment for that planting. By and large, their incentive payment will be coming from their recovery payment, or their safety net will be coming from the prevent plant, not from MFP. The market facilitation programs obviously designed to address trade issues and not designed to address weather issues. But again, as I pointed out earlier, there is also the disaster bill that we're looking at, the supplemental disaster that also calls up prevent plant. And so again, that's another balancing act that we're undergoing right now in the department.
Figured out how to spend the $3 billion in that yet, the supplemental?
The supplemental has, you know, as you're aware, the prevent plant provisions that were added to that were added after the amount of the supplemental had already been determined. So, of course, as the Secretary has pointed out, there were you know, the hurricanes and wildfires from 2018 that certainly are intended for being compensated to the extent that they affected producers in the Southeast in terms of the hurricanes, and in California with respect to the wildfires. And of course, there's other disasters in there as well, volcanoes included. And then, of course, we are looking at how this interacts with prevent plant and what additional flexibilities can be provided to producers as a component of that supplemental disaster bill.
All right, be equitable. Thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Senator Hogan.